The Nexus Prime Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of crystalline architecture, its translucent walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that supposedly represented the collective wisdom of 14,000 civilizations. Of course, if collective wisdom looked like a disco ball having an epileptic seizure, then the architects had truly outdone themselves. The chamber's design was meant to inspire awe, and it certainly succeeded, though perhaps not in the way the Council's pretentious decorating committee had intended. Floating platforms arranged in concentric circles housed delegates from across the galaxy, each species positioned according to their perceived importance in the cosmic pecking order. The inner circle belonged to the Primarch races, those ancient civilizations who had apparently been around long enough to develop both faster-than-light travel and insufferably superior attitudes. The middle rings contained the moderates, species who had achieved basic interstellar competence without completely losing their minds in the process. And there, relegated to the outermost ring like children at the adults' table, sat the newcomer. Among these galactic rookies, the human delegation occupied a modest platform that looked almost quaint compared to the crystalline monstrosities surrounding it. 3 representatives sat in simple chairs, revolutionary technology by galactic standards, apparently, while their neighbors floated in gravity-defying meditation poses, or writhed in what passed for comfortable seating among species with too many limbs and not enough sense. The session's moderator, a Vorthak whose name contained 17 consonants and 3 sounds that could shatter glass, announced the day's proceedings with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. Today's agenda included trade disputes, territorial boundaries, and the ever-popular "Why haven't we conquered everything yet?" discussion that seemed to dominate every council meeting. But all eyes and various other sensory organs were fixed on the inner circle's most prominent platform, where Commander Zethkalar of the Andromeda Strategic Command held court like a peacock with delusions of grandeur. The Andromedans were tall, imposing beings with chitinous exoskeletons that gleamed like polished obsidian and cranial ridges that suggested either evolutionary sophistication or really unfortunate headgear choices. Their military prowess was legendary across 17 galaxies, their strategic brilliance unquestioned, and their ego absolutely astronomical. Zethkalar stood nearly 3 meters tall, his 4 arms crossed in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both boredom and superiority. His compound eyes swept the chamber with the casual disdain of someone who had personally conquered star systems before breakfast. The various ornamental scarifications across his carapace told the story of countless victories, each mark representing a defeated enemy or a crushed rebellion. He was, by all accounts, the most dangerous military mind in the known universe. He was also, coincidentally, about to make the most embarrassing mistake of his extended lifespan. The commander's reputation preceded him like a fanfare of destruction. He had personally led the pacification of the Rigel sector, turned the Kronos Rebellion into a 3-day vacation, and once defeated an entire fleet by simply staring at it, until the enemy commanders lost the will to live. His tactical genius was so renowned that military academies across the galaxy used his battles as case studies in the art of overwhelming superiority. Lesser species whispered his name in hushed tones, partly out of respect and partly because pronouncing it incorrectly could result in diplomatic incident. The Zephyrians had once mispronounced a syllable during a formal introduction, and found their home system mysteriously experiencing routine military exercises for the next 6 months. As the session droned on through various administrative minutiae, Zethkalar's attention drifted to the human delegation. These newcomers had been granted council membership through what he considered a clerical error of cosmic proportion. Humans had barely mastered their own solar system, let alone proven themselves worthy of sitting among the galaxy's elite. Their military record consisted of fighting each other with primitive weapons and questionable tactics. Their technology was laughably antiquated, and their diplomatic skills apparently consisted of loud talking and occasional table pounding. The human leader sat calmly in the center of their modest platform, appearing utterly relaxed despite being surrounded by beings who could incinerate planets with a thought. This display of either courage or stupidity intrigued the commander in the same way a particularly interesting insect might catch one's attention before being crushed underfoot. The session's climax approached when the topic of military contributions to galactic security arose. Each species was expected to demonstrate their commitment to Council defense initiatives, a tradition that allowed the more powerful races to showcase their superiority while the weaker ones scrambled to avoid embarrassment. Zathkalar seized the moment with the theatrical flair of someone who had spent centuries perfecting the art of public humiliation. Rising to his full imposing height, he activated the chamber's acoustic enhancement system, ensuring his words would carry the proper weight of authority. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice resonating through the chamber like controlled thunder, "we speak of defense contributions, yet I observe species among us whose military capability remain theoretical." His compound eyes fixed on the human delegation with laser-like precision. "Perhaps it is time we separated the warriors from the pretenders." The chamber fell silent, sensing the approaching storm. Diplomatic tensions crackled through the air like static electricity, and several nervous delegates began edging away from potential blast zone. I, Commander Zathkalar of the Andromeda Strategic Command, formally challenged the human delegation to demonstrate their worthiness through combat trial. His words carried the weight of ancient tradition and absolute confidence. "Let us see if these newcomers possess the strength to stand among the galaxy's elite, or if their presence here has been merely charitable." The silence that followed Zathkalar's challenge was the kind that usually preceded either standing ovations or funeral services. In this case, it felt decidedly more like the latter. The assembled delegates exchanged glances that ranged from horrified fascination to barely concealed glee. There was nothing quite like watching someone else's impending doom to spice up an otherwise tedious council session. The human leader, a remarkably unremarkable individual by galactic standards, remained seated while chaos erupted around the chamber. No dramatic standing, no theatrical gestures, no impressive displays of righteous fury. Just a slight tilt of the head, as if considering whether to order coffee or tea with breakfast. This casual response to what amounted to a galactic death sentence was either the height of stupidity or the most sophisticated form of psychological warfare the Council had ever witnessed. The betting pools opened immediately. The Zarathian delegates, who could calculate probability matrices faster than most species could blink, gave the humans odds of roughly 14 billion to 1 against. The Crystalline Consortium, beings of pure logic and mathematical precision, declared the outcome so statistically inevitable that participating in wagers would constitute fraud. Even the pacifist Luminari, who opposed violence on philosophical grounds, quietly placed credits on the Andromeda Commander finishing the job in under 30 seconds. Meanwhile, the Vorthak moderator frantically shuffled through ancient protocols, trying to determine if there was any precedent for stopping what was clearly about to become a very messy diplomatic incident. The last time a challenge of this magnitude had been issued, the resulting conflict had sterilized 3-star systems and created a black hole that still served as a tourist attraction in the Outer Rim. The human delegation's platform had become an island of calm in an ocean of barely controlled hysteria. Their leader finally stood, moving with the unhurried grace of someone who had absolutely nowhere else to be. The simple action drew every eye in the chamber, creating a spotlight effect that would have been dramatic if the subject had been anyone other than what appeared to be a middle-aged bureaucrat in a remarkably ordinary suit. "Interesting," the human said, voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic system. No amplification, no theatrical volume, just conversational tone that somehow commanded attention more effectively than all of Zathkalar's booming declaration. Those 2 words hit the chamber like a small-yield nuclear device. The betting odds shifted so rapidly that several financial systems crashed, and at least 3 delegates fainted from the shock. The Crystalline Consortium's probability matrices began smoking, and the Zarathians started recalculating with the desperate intensity of beings who had just realized they might lose their quarterly bonuses. Zathkalar's compound eyes gleamed with satisfaction. This was going exactly as planned. The humans' acceptance would provide the perfect demonstration of Andromeda's superiority, while simultaneously removing an annoying obstacle to proper galactic order. It was efficiency and entertainment rolled into one delightfully destructive package. But something nagged at the commander's consciousness, a tiny detail that refused to fit the expected pattern. The humans' acceptance had been too calm, too immediate. Where was the desperate bravado, the futile posturing, the inevitable begging for mercy that typically preceded such encounters? The Council's intelligence networks had compiled extensive files on human military history, and the results were simultaneously fascinating and pathetic. These creatures had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing each other with increasingly creative methods. Their wars read like catalogs of barely controlled insanity, poison gas, nuclear weapons, biological warfare, and combat strategies that seemed designed by committee meetings of lunatics. Yet their technological limitations were laughable. They fought with chemical projectiles when the galaxy used plasma cannons. They traveled between stars using crude fusion drives while civilized species folded space-time like origami. Their most advanced artificial intelligence couldn't match the cognitive capabilities of a standard Andromedan field calculator. The human leader remained standing, hands clasped behind his back in a pose that suggested either military discipline or chronic lower back problems. His two companions showed no signs of distress, no attempts to talk their leader out of what was clearly a suicide mission. They sat with the relaxed confidence of people watching a mildly interesting documentary. This complete lack of appropriate terror was beginning to irritate the command. Victims were supposed to display fear, desperation, perhaps a touching final speech about their homeworld's natural beauty. Instead, the human delegation acted as if they were waiting for a delayed shuttle rather than witnessing the prelude to their leader's spectacular demise. The challenge parameters, the human asked, as if discussing lunch arrangements rather than the terms of his own destruction. Zethakalar's forearms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimous generosity. Combat trial, traditional form. Single combat, no weapons beyond personal capability. Victory by submission or incapacitation. He paused for dramatic effect. Or death, naturally. The human nodded thoughtfully. Standard Council witness protocols. Of course. The commander's voice carried the satisfaction of a predator who had just cornered particularly slow prey. All 14,000 member species as witness. Complete neural recording for historical archive. Your species will have an excellent documentation of why they should never have been granted council membership. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably at this breach of diplomatic protocol, but none dared challenge the Andromeda Commander's authority. The betting pools had reached astronomical numbers, with some species wagering their entire planetary gross products on the outcome. The Ferengi had established a complex derivative market based on the expected duration of the contest. The human leader's response was a simple nod, as if he had just confirmed a dinner reservation rather than agreed to single combat with the galaxy's most dangerous warrior. This casual acceptance of imminent doom was starting to disturb even the most bloodthirsty delegate. "Excellent," Zethakalar declared, his voice echoing through the chamber with the finality of a closing tune. "Let us proceed to the combat arena. Time to demonstrate the natural order of the universe." The challenge was set. The stage was prepared, and somewhere in the cosmic background, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what was about to become the most memorable 7 seconds in galactic history. The combat arena materialized around them with the kind of technological showmanship that the Council loved to display. Holographic barriers created a perfect circle 50 meters in diameter, while gravity generators adjusted the field to standard galactic parameters. The arena floor gleamed with a metallic sheen that could withstand plasma bombardment, antimatter explosions, and the occasional temper tantrum from politicians who had lost important votes. The assembled delegates crowded around the viewing platforms like spectators at a particularly gruesome sporting event. Some had activated recording devices to capture what they assumed would be humanity's final moment on the galactic stage. Others had opened betting pools on the exact method of the human's demise. The Crystalline Consortium had calculated 847 different ways the contest could end, none of which involved human victory. Zethakalar entered the arena with the theatrical flair of someone who had performed this ritual countless times before. His forearms moved in flowing combat gestures, each motion demonstrating the deadly precision that had made him the galaxy's most feared warrior. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the arena's lighting, battle scarifications telling the story of 1,000 victories against impossible odds. The commander's pre-combat routine was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He began with the 17 forms of dominance, ancient Andromedan martial positions designed to intimidate opponents into submission before the actual fighting began. Each pose showcased different aspects of his lethal capabilities. The mantis of ending demonstrated his striking speed. The coiled serpent revealed his grappling expertise, and the dancing death showed his ability to fight multiple opponents simultaneously. The human leader entered from the opposite side of the arena, and the contrast was almost comically stark. No dramatic gestures, no intimidating poses, no impressive displays of flexibility or strength. He simply walked to the center of the arena, loosened his tie slightly, and waited. The collective disappointment from the spectators was palpable. They had expected at least some token effort at pre-combat theatrics. Zethkalar's compound eyes fixed on his opponent with the intensity of a predator studying prey. This human was smaller than expected, softer looking than the warrior species, and showed no signs of the combat modifications that most civilized species adopted for serious conflict. No reinforced skeletal structure, no enhanced musculature, no visible weapons implant, just an ordinary-looking individual in business attire, who seemed mildly inconvenienced by the whole affair. The commander's confidence reached stratospheric levels. This would be over quickly, efficiently, and with just enough dramatic flair to cement his reputation for another few decades. Perhaps he would start with a demonstration of superior speed, then move to a display of overwhelming strength, before finishing with one of the classic submission holds that had made him famous across 17 galaxies. Announced the Vorthak moderator, and the arena's combat protocols activated. What happened next would be analyzed, dissected, and argued about for the next 1,000 years. Zethkalar launched himself forward with the fluid grace of a natural predator, forearms moving in perfect synchronization to deliver a combination strike that had never failed to incapacitate an opponent. His movement was poetry in motion, a deadly dance that combined centuries of martial tradition with personal innovation. The attack was flawless, unstoppable, and absolutely guaranteed to end the contest within seconds. The human leader took one step to the side, not a dramatic dodge, not an impressive defensive maneuver, not even a particularly athletic movement. Just a simple step that placed him exactly where the commander's attack wasn't. The result was that 4 tons of genetically enhanced Andromedan warrior flew past his intended target, and crashed into the arena's barrier with a sound like a small meteor impact. The silence that followed was so profound that several delegates checked their hearing implants for malfunction. The crystalline consortium's probability matrices began displaying error messages. The betting pools froze as their algorithm struggled to process an outcome that had 0% chance of occurring. Zethkalar extracted himself from the barrier with the dignity of someone who had just demonstrated advanced physics rather than elementary incompetence. This was clearly a fluke, a momentary lapse in concentration that would not be repeated. The human's luck had simply delayed the inevitable by a few seconds. The commander's second attack was even more impressive than the first. He employed the whirlwind of endings, a technique that created a sphere of destruction around his target, making evasion theoretically impossible. His forearms moved in overlapping patterns, while his legs delivered devastating kicks, creating a combat display that would have been beautiful if it weren't so thoroughly lethal. The human leader ducked. Again, not a dramatic evasion or an impressive athletic feat, just a simple duck that placed his head below the level of the commander's perfectly coordinated assault. The result was that Zethkalar's devastating combination attack encountered nothing but empty air while the human straightened up behind him. The arena's silence deepened to the point where it became almost physically oppressive. Several delegates began checking their life support systems, convinced that something had gone seriously wrong with the environment control. The Zarathian's probability calculations had progressed beyond error messages to complete system shutdown. Zethkalar's third attack was driven by desperation disguised as fury. He abandoned finesse in favor of overwhelming force, launching himself at the human with the single-minded determination of a guided missile. This time, there would be no evasion, no lucky movements, no inexplicable failures. This time, the natural order of the universe would be restored. The human leader stepped forward and extended his hand. The commander, moving at maximum velocity with no possibility of course correction, ran directly into what was essentially a formal handshake. The impact was spectacular, combining the laws of physics with the comedy of errors to create a moment that would be remembered long after civilizations had risen and fallen. Zethkalar collapsed like a controlled demolition, his unconscious form hitting the arena floor with the finality of a gavel striking wood. The human leader stood over him, hands still extended in greeting, with the expression of someone who had just witnessed a mildly interesting traffic accident. 7 seconds. That was the official duration of the combat trial. 7 seconds to completely shatter the reputation of the galaxy's most feared warrior and establish humanity's place in the cosmic order, through the simple expedient of not being where attacks were aimed. The arena's medical systems activated automatically, diagnosing the commander's condition as severe concussion, combined with what appeared to be acute embarrassment. The human leader straightened his tie, brushed imaginary dust from his suit, and walked calmly toward the exit. Behind him the assembled delegates sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The betting pools had crashed so thoroughly that several economic systems were experiencing cascading failure. The crystalline consortium's probability matrices were displaying philosophical questions about the nature of reality. And somewhere in the cosmic background, the universe itself seemed to chuckle at the beautiful absurdity of it all. The aftermath of the 7-second spectacular spread across the galaxy faster than bad news at a family reunion. Within hours, every news network, gossip channel and underground information broker was broadcasting footage of the mighty Zeth-Caller's encounter with basic physics and human unpredictability. The holographic recordings played on endless loop, each viewing somehow making the commander's defeat appear even more thoroughly comprehensive. The immediate reaction in the council chambers resembled a cross between a funeral and a comedy club. Delegates who had spent centuries cowering before Andromedan military might suddenly found themselves re-evaluating their position in the galactic hierarchy. The crystalline consortium's probability matrices had finally stopped displaying error messages and begun calculating the odds of other supposedly impossible events, like the heat death of the universe occurring ahead of schedule, or politicians telling the truth. The human delegation returned to their modest platform with the same casual demeanor they had displayed throughout the entire affair. No victory speeches, no triumphant gestures, no demands for immediate recognition of their newfound status. They simply sat back down and waited for the session to continue, as if knocking unconscious the galaxy's most feared warrior was just another item on their diplomatic to-do list. This complete lack of gloating was perhaps more disturbing to the assembled delegates than the actual defeat itself. Victorious species were supposed to display their superiority, make demands, perhaps engage in some light territorial expansion. Instead, the humans acted as if nothing particularly noteworthy had occurred, which was either the height of sophisticated diplomacy or evidence of a species-wide psychological disorder. The betting pools had evolved into something resembling abstract art, crossed with financial chaos theory. The Ferengi derivative markets had collapsed so completely that several traders had been hospitalized for acute stress reactions. The Zarathians were frantically recalculating their entire understanding of probability mathematics, while the pacifist Luminari had made so much money on their impossible bet that they were considering abandoning pacifism for professional gambling. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Zeth-Caller was experiencing what medical professionals diplomatically termed a comprehensive reassessment of reality. The physical damage was minimal: a concussion, some bruised pride, and the kind of headache that typically accompanied having one's worldview shattered by a handshake. The psychological damage, however, was approaching the scale of a small natural disaster. The commander's defeat had triggered a cascade of consequences across the Andromedan military hierarchy. His subordinates were engaging in frantic damage control, trying to explain how their supposedly invincible leader had been defeated by what appeared to be accidental competence. The official reports described the encounter as an unprecedented tactical anomaly and a statistically impossible confluence of variables, which was military speak for "we have absolutely no idea what just happened." The broader galactic community was experiencing its own form of collective shock. Species that had based their entire foreign policy on avoiding Andromedan displeasure suddenly found themselves reconsidering their options. The Ragil sector, still recovering from their pacification, sent a carefully worded message congratulating the human delegation on their diplomatic success. The Kronos rebels, who had been scattered to the galactic winds, began holding reunion meetings for the first time in decades. The human leader, seemingly oblivious to the cosmic upheaval he had triggered, spent the remainder of the session reviewing routine trade agreements with the focused attention of someone who found agricultural import quotas genuinely fascinating. His colleagues maintained their positions as silent observers, occasionally making notes in what appeared to be standard diplomatic notebooks rather than the tactical analysis manuals that most species would have been consulted. This mundane behavior was driving the galactic intelligence community to distraction. Every major power had assigned their best analysts to decode the humans' apparent strategy, searching for hidden meanings in their casual demeanor and sophisticated techniques concealed within their obvious simplicity. The prevailing theory was that humanity possessed such advanced psychological warfare capabilities that they could appear completely ordinary while systematically dismantling the established order. The truth, of course, was far more disturbing than any elaborate conspiracy theory. The human delegation wasn't employing advanced tactics or hidden strategy. They were simply conducting themselves with the kind of practical competence that their species had developed through millennia of dealing with unreasonable situations, impossible odds, and the occasional need to survive encounters with beings who wanted to kill them. The council session eventually concluded with the kind of administrative efficiency that typically followed traumatic events. Various species filed their reports, submitted their proposals, and scheduled their follow-up meetings while carefully avoiding any reference to the day's central drama. The official records would note that a diplomatic demonstration had occurred, with all parties gaining valuable insights into intercultural communication protocol. As the delegates dispersed to their respective vessels, the gossip networks activated with the intensity of a communication supernova. The story of the 7-second confrontation would be told and retold across the galaxy, gaining embellishments and interpretations with each transmission. Future generations would debate whether the humans' victory was the result of superior tactics, incredible luck, or evidence that the universe itself possessed a sense of humor. The Andromeda Strategic Command faced the unenviable task of explaining to their political leadership how their most celebrated warrior had been defeated by what appeared to be customer service training. Zithkalar's exile to a remote monitoring station in the Outer Rim was announced as a strategic reassignment to advance galactic security initiatives, which fooled absolutely no one but maintained the fiction that institutional competence remained intact. The human delegation departed the Nexus Prime facility with the same unremarkable efficiency they had displayed throughout their visit. Their vessel was a modest transport that wouldn't have impressed anyone at a used spacecraft lot, let alone the diplomatic corps of a galactic superpower. Yet as it disappeared into hyperspace, every intelligence agency in the galaxy was frantically analyzing its engine signatures and trying to determine what terrible secrets it might contain. The ultimate irony was that humanity's elevation to galactic prominence had been achieved not through superior technology, advanced tactics, or diplomatic brilliance, but through the simple expedient of not being where attacks were aimed. In a universe full of species who had spent millennia perfecting the art of complicated solutions to simple problems, the humans had demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of doing exactly what the situation required, nothing more and nothing less. And somewhere in the cosmic background, the universe continued its eternal chuckle at the beautiful absurdity of beings who could conquer star systems but couldn't figure out how to shake hands without falling over.